I was given poison on my daughter's wedding day. The man who raised the glass in a loving toast. My new son-in-law, David, had slipped a lethal, slow-acting toxin into my champagne, a poison designed to mimic a sudden, fatal heart attack days later, leaving no trace and raising no questions. His plan, conceived with a chilling, sociopathic precision, was to inherit my entire estate through my grieving daughter, Sarah, whom he would then control completely. He thought he was so clever that his scheme was perfect, but he made one critical mistake. He didn't ensure I was dead before I started digging. The first sip was bitter, a sharp metallic tang that cut through the crisp bubbles. I thought it was just cheap champagne, a misstep by the caterers. I saw David watching me, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too focused. "Too family," he had said, his voice dripping with a sincerity I now recognize as pure malice. "To new beginnings." I forced a smile, toasted back, and took another small sip, the bitterness coating my tongue. I was already feeling lightheaded, but I blamed the heat, the emotion, the overwhelming joy of seeing my little girl so happy. It wasn't until the first cramp seized my stomach, a hot, twisting knife of pain, that a primal alarm bell clanged in the depths of my soul. This was no ordinary indisposition. This was a warning. I discreetly spat the mouthful of champagne into a napkin, my heart hammering against my ribs. The game had begun, and I was the prey who had just discovered the hunter's scent. The rest of the reception was a blur of agony and forced smiles. Every laugh felt like a shard of glass in my throat. Every time David looked my way, I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. How could I have been so blind? I had welcomed him into our family, into our home. I had paid for this lavish wedding, a 6-figure affair at the city's most exclusive botanical gardens. I had even signed over the deed to the old Briarwood estate, a property I had inherited from my own mother, as a wedding gift to them. It was meant to be a foundation for their future. Now, I saw it for what it was, the first domino to fall in his plan to erase me completely. I made my excuses early, pleading a migraine. Sarah, my beautiful, radiant Sarah, was concerned. "Mom, you're pale as a ghost. Let David drive you home." The thought of being in a confined space with him, of his hands on the steering wheel, made my blood run cold. "No, no, darling." I managed kissing her cheek, trying to ignore the way David's arm was possessively wrapped around her waist. "You stay. Enjoy your night. I just need some quiet." I saw the flicker of something in David's eyes. Annoyance? Impatience? He recovered quickly, his face a mask of solicitous concern. "Are you sure, Eleanor? It's no trouble at all." The use of my first name, always so formal, now felt like a deliberate distancing. "I'm sure," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I fled the venue, the sounds of celebration feeling like a mockery of my impending doom. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I poured myself a glass of water from the kitchen tap, my hands trembling so violently the water sloshed over the sides. I had to think. Was I going crazy? Was it just stress? But the metallic taste was still there, a phantom poison on my tongue. The stomach cramps had subsided to a dull, persistent ache. I needed proof. I couldn't go to the police with a story about bitter champagne and a feeling of dread. They would dismiss me as a hysterical, menopausal woman, jealous of her daughter's new husband. David was charming, successful, a young architect with a seemingly flawless reputation. I was just a widow, a mother of the bride. Who would they believe? I spent a sleepless night, my mind racing. I thought of my late husband, Robert. He was a fighter, a man who built his construction empire from the ground up with grit and sheer force of will. "Trust your gut, Ellie," he used to say. "It's smarter than your head sometimes." My gut was screaming that I was in mortal danger. By dawn, I had a plan. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was all I had. I needed to investigate David myself. I needed to find out who he really was. The man Sarah had fallen in love with was a carefully constructed fiction. I had to find the cracks in the facade. My first stop 2 days after the wedding was a private investigator. Arthur Brannigan operated out of a small, unassuming office above a laundromat. He was a man in his late 50s, with the weary eyes of someone who had seen every shade of human deceit. I told him my story, leaving out the poison, focusing instead on my suspicions about David's past and his financial motivations. "I think he's after my daughter's inheritance," I said, which was true, if not the whole horrifying truth. Brannigan listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he leaned back in his creaky leather chair. "Mrs. Grayson, what you're asking for? A deep background check, financials, the works. It's expensive. And most of the time, the son-in-law just turns out to be a bit of a prick, not a criminal mastermind." I met his gaze, the fear in my stomach hardening into resolve. "Money is not an object, Mr. Brannigan, and I am not most mothers. I need to know. I need to be sure." I slid an envelope of cash across his desk, a retainer that represented a significant portion of my liquid savings. He looked at the envelope, then back at me, and gave a slow nod. "All right, Mrs. Grayson. We'll see what we can dig up. Give me a week." Leaving his office, I felt a small measure of control return, but it was short-lived. That afternoon, the symptoms returned with a vengeance. A crushing fatigue settled over me, making the simple act of climbing the stairs to my bedroom feel like a marathon. My vision would occasionally blur at the edges, and I developed a persistent dry cough. I told myself it was a virus, the stress finally taking its physical toll. But in my heart, I knew the poison was still inside me, working its slow, malevolent magic. David hadn't given me enough for an immediate, dramatic death. He had given me a timed dose, something that would kill me quietly, days from now, when the connection to the wedding would be a distant memory. He was giving himself the perfect alibi. 3 days after the wedding, David and Sarah returned from their brief local honeymoon. They came over for dinner, a tradition I usually cherished. Sarah was glowing, chattering excitedly about their plans for the Briarwood estate. "David has the most amazing ideas, Mom. He wants to completely renovate the main house, add a glass-walled extension overlooking the garden. It's going to be stunning." David sat beside her, smiling indulgently, his hand resting on her knee. He looked the picture of the adoring husband. "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "You still look a bit peaky. That migraine really took it out of you, didn't it?" His eyes were like 2 dark pools, and I felt he was looking right through me, assessing his handiwork. "I'm fine," I said, my voice a little too sharp. Sarah looked at me, puzzled. "Just a bit of a lingering bug, I think." "You should see a doctor," David pressed, his tone gentle but insistent. "At your age, you can't be too careful with these things. Heart problems can often present as fatigue and general malaise." He said the words so smoothly, so convincingly. He was planting the seed, not just for me, but for Sarah. When I dropped dead of an apparent heart attack, she would remember this conversation. She would think he had been so caring, so proactive. The sheer, audacious cruelty of it took my breath away. "I'll be sure to make an appointment," I lied, my appetite gone. I pushed the food around my plate, my mind racing. He was monitoring me. He was waiting for me to die. The dinner was an interrogation disguised as a family meal. I had to get through it. I had to pretend I knew nothing. The stakes were no longer just my life or my fortune. They were my daughter's future. If David was capable of killing me, what would he do to Sarah once he had full control? The thought was more terrifying than any poison. After they left, the house felt emptier and more threatening than ever. I double-checked all the locks. A new ritual. I was a prisoner in my own home, waiting for my body to betray me, waiting for Brannigan's call, waiting for the next move in a deadly game I never asked to play. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a constant, mocking reminder that my time was running out. Arthur Brannigan's call came 5 days later, pulling me from a fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep. His voice was grim, all traces of his initial skepticism gone. Mrs. Grayson, we need to talk. In person. My office, 1 hour. The line went dead before I could respond. The finality in his tone sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He had found something bad. I drove to his office with a sense of impending doom, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The city, usually so familiar, seemed alien and menacing. Brannigan was waiting for me, the door to his inner office already open. His desk was littered with files and printouts. He didn't offer me a seat or a coffee. "It's worse than you thought," he began, getting straight to the point. "The man your daughter married isn't David Miller?" He let that hang in the air for a moment, the words sucking all the air out of the room. "His real name is David Marsh. He changed it legally 7 years ago, after he was released from a 5-year stint in a New York State prison for aggravated assault and fraud." I sank into the chair opposite him, my legs unable to support me. "Prison?" The word was a whisper. "Not just any prison," Brannigan continued, his eyes hard. He was the protege of a notorious con man named Silas Vane. Their MO was romance scams. They would target wealthy, lonely women, befriend them, gain their trust, and then systematically drain their bank accounts. The assault charge came when one of their marks figured it out and confronted them. Vane is still inside. Your son-in-law David testified against him for a reduced sentence. I felt the world tilt on its axis. The charming, handsome architect was a fiction, a character created to ensnare my daughter. Sarah wasn't just in love with a gold digger. She was married to a violent, convicted felon. His architecture firm? I managed to ask, my throat tight. A complete sham. A fancy website, a virtual office, but no clients, no building permits, no income. He's been living off a series of maxed-out credit cards and small-time grifts for years. The wedding, the suit, the car. It was all funded by you, Mrs. Grayson. You were his biggest mark. The pieces were falling into a horrifying picture. David hadn't just wanted a comfortable life. He had seen my family as his ultimate score. He had studied us, identified me as the primary obstacle, and devised a plan to remove me. A divorce from Sarah would have been messy, potentially leaving him with nothing, but a grieving widow inheriting everything. That was a much cleaner, more profitable outcome. The prenuptial agreement I had insisted Sarah sign now seemed like a pathetic, useless piece of paper. It protected her in case of divorce, but it said nothing about what happened if I died. "Did you find anything else?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Anything about poison?" Brannigan's eyebrows shot up. "Poison? That's a new one. No, nothing that specific. But I did find this." He slid a grainy photocopy of a bank statement across the desk. It was from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, under the name D. Marsh. A single massive deposit had been made 2 weeks before the wedding. The amount was $500,000. The source of the funds was listed as Vane Holdings. Silas Vane, I breathed, the name tasting like ash. "He's involved?" "Looks like he's bankrolling the operation from behind bars," Brannigan said grimly. "This isn't just a one-man show, Mrs. Grayson. Your son-in-law is working with his old partner. That deposit was seed money. For what, I don't know. But a man doesn't get that kind of investment without promising a significant return. The return was my entire estate. My house, my investments, the Briarwood estate. It was all worth millions. David had sold his soul to his former mentor, promising him a cut of the inheritance in exchange for the upfront capital to pull off the perfect crime. My murder was a business transaction. I left Brannigan's office with a file full of nightmares and a USB drive containing all the evidence. I felt numb, detached from my own body. The proof was in my hands, a damning portrait of a monster. But what could I do with it? Go to the police? I had evidence of fraud and a connection to a known criminal, but nothing concrete about the poisoning. It was my word against his, and with my deteriorating health, I would look like a confused, sick old woman, easily manipulated by a slick lawyer. I drove home in a trance, the file burning a hole in my purse. I had to tell Sarah. I had to show her the evidence, make her see the man she had married. But how? David had her completely under his thumb. She was blinded by love, by the perfect life he had promised her. If I confronted her directly, she would tell David, and that would force his hand. He would accelerate his plan. He would kill me outright. Or worse, he might decide Sarah was a liability and hurt her too. I was pulling into my driveway when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Mom, David and I are swinging by in an hour to pick up those family photo albums you promised me. Can't wait to see them. Love you." My blood ran cold. The photo albums were in my study, on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, right next to my desk. The desk where I had just hidden Brannigan's file in a locked drawer. This wasn't a social visit. This was a reconnaissance mission. David was getting nervous. He was checking on me, and he was looking for an opportunity to search my house, to see if I had become a threat. Panic seized me. I had less than an hour. I rushed inside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't let him find that file. I grabbed it from the drawer, my eyes scanning the room for a new hiding place. Where would he not look? I thought of Robert, of his old golf trophies in the basement. He had a large, hollow one from a charity tournament. I raced downstairs, my legs weak and unsteady, and stuffed the file in the USB drive inside the faux gold cup, replacing the lid just as the doorbell chimed upstairs. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I had to be an actress now. I had to be the doting, slightly ill mother, oblivious to the snake in her garden. I walked to the door and opened it, a strained smile on my face. Sarah stood there, beaming, while David loomed behind her, his eyes already scanning the entryway, missing nothing. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, enveloping me in a hug. She felt so small, so fragile in my arms. I was her mother. I was supposed to protect her, and I was failing. Come in," I said, my voice sounding brittle. "The albums are right in the study." David followed us, his presence a dark cloud in the house. As Sarah happily gathered the heavy albums, David lingered by my desk. "You know, Eleanor, you really do look unwell," he said, his voice laced with fake sympathy. "That bug is really hanging on. Have you seen that doctor yet?" "Not yet," I said, forcing a casual tone. "I've been busy." "You really must make your health a priority." He pressed, his gaze drifting over the surface of my desk, taking in the neat piles of paper, the closed laptop. He was looking for anything out of place, any sign of my investigation. "We worry about you, all alone in this big house." The subtext was clear. "We're waiting for you to die." I felt a surge of pure, undiluted hatred so strong, it momentarily overpowered the fear. This man, this viper, was in my home, pretending to care while he counted down the hours until my heart stopped beating. "I'm tougher than I look. David," I said, meeting his gaze squarely for the first time. A flicker of surprise and then annoyance crossed his features. He wasn't used to defiance. "I'm sure you are," he replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But even the toughest of us need to be careful." He turned to Sarah. "Ready, sweetheart? We should let your mother get her rest." As they left, David carrying the albums, he gave me one last, long look over his shoulder. It was a look of cold assessment, a predator recalculating the threat level of its prey. The mask had slipped, just for a second. He knew I was hiding something. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The clock was ticking louder than ever, and I was running out of time to save myself and my daughter from the monster I had let into our lives. The confrontation with David left me shaken to my core, the subtle shift in his demeanor, the calculating coldness in his eyes. It was a declaration of war. He was no longer just waiting for the poison to do its work. He was actively engaged in the hunt. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of heightened paranoia, jumping at every creak of the old house, scrutinizing every morsel of food and sip of water. I lived on sealed, pre-packaged protein shakes and bottled water I bought from different stores. My appetite gone, replaced by a constant gnawing fear. The physical symptoms were worsening. The fatigue was now a leaden weight, making it difficult to get out of bed. The blurred vision returned in waves, and I developed a persistent, racking cough that left me breathless and my ribs sore. I was a ghost in my own life, fading away piece by piece. I knew with a terrifying certainty that I didn't have much time left. David's poison was winning. I couldn't go to a regular doctor. David would find out. He had likely already accessed my medical records or had a contact who could. A diagnosis of unexplained toxicity would raise alarms, and he would be the first to play the concerned family member, steering the investigation away from himself. I was trapped. My only hope was to find an antidote, or at least understand what I was dealing with. And for that, I needed to get a sample of the poison itself. An impossible task, or was it? A memory, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of my illness. The wedding, the champagne flute. I had spat the poisoned wine into a napkin. In my panic to leave, what had I done with it? I had crumpled it in my hand, my clutch purse. I had shoved it into my purse. I stumbled to my walk-in closet, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. There, on the top shelf, was the beaded clutch I had carried that day. With trembling hands, I took it down and emptied the contents onto my bed. A lipstick, a compact, a few stray tissues, and a hotel key card. And there at the bottom was a tightly balled-up linen napkin. I picked it up carefully, my breath catching in my throat. It was stiff and stained a faint, ugly brown, the residue of the poison. This was my evidence. This was the key. But I couldn't take it to the police lab. David would have eyes and ears there too. I needed a private, discreet toxicologist, someone completely off the books. I thought of Robert again. In his construction days, he'd sometimes had to deal with environmental site assessments. He had once mentioned a man, a brilliant but eccentric chemist named Dr. Alistair Finch, who ran a private lab that handled sensitive and unconventional analyses. Robert had said the man was paranoid, brilliant, and expensive. He was perfect. Finding him was the next challenge. A search of Robert's old paper Rolodex, he never trusted digital contacts, yielded a single faded business card tucked behind the F tab. Finch Analytical, with a P.O. box address and a number that was no longer in service. It was a dead end. Desperation clawed at me. I called Brannigan. "I need you to find someone for me," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "A Dr. Alistair Finch. He's a chemist. He had a lab, probably a decade ago." Brannigan was silent for a moment. "This related to the other matter?" "Directly," I confirmed. "It's a matter of life and death. My life." He let out a long sigh. "I'll see what I can do. It'll cost you? Just find him," he called back 3 hours later. "Your Dr. Finch is a hard man to find. He's gone to ground. Had some trouble with the FDA a few years back. Practicing medicine without a license, that kind of thing. He operates out of a rented warehouse unit in an industrial park on the south side. I'm texting you the address. Mrs. Grayson, be careful. This guy is not exactly mainstream. I didn't care. He was my only hope. That evening, under the cover of a torrential downpour, I drove to the address Brannigan had provided. The industrial park was a bleak landscape of corrugated metal and flickering sodium lights, puddled with oily water. Unit 7B had no sign, just a number stenciled in fading paint on a heavy steel door. I knocked, the sound swallowed by the drumming rain. After a long moment, an intercom crackled to life. "State your business." The voice was reedy, nervous. "My name is Eleanor Grayson. My husband was Robert Grayson. He said you were the best." There was another pause, then the sound of several bolts being drawn back. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a pale, gaunt face behind thick glasses. Dr. Alistair Finch looked like a man who hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He peered at me, his eyes darting around behind me. "Grayson, the construction guy? He's dead." "I know," I said, rainwater dripping from my hair. "I'm his widow. I need your help." "It's urgent." He hesitated, then opened the door just wide enough for me to slip inside. The warehouse was a chaotic marvel. One half looked like a legitimate laboratory, with beakers, microscopes, and humming analytical machines. The other half was a cluttered living space, with a rumpled cot, a hot plate, and stacks of scientific journals reaching towards the high ceiling. The air smelled of chemicals and stale coffee. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, wringing his hands slightly. I took the plastic evidence bag from my purse, inside it the stained napkin. "I need this analyzed. I believe it contains a poison, a slow-acting one. I need to know what it is, and if there's an antidote." His eyes lit up with a professional curiosity that momentarily overrode his paranoia. "A poison? Interesting. Symptoms?" I listed them. The metallic taste, the fatigue, the gastrointestinal distress, the blurred vision, the cough. He nodded, taking the bag from me with a reverent carefulness. "Cardiac glycosides, perhaps, or a heavy metal compound, or something more exotic. The slow-acting nature suggests a sophisticated formulation. Not your common rat poison." He looked at me, his head cocked. "Who did this to you?" "I can't say," I whispered, "but I'm running out of time." "I'll need at least 48 hours, he said, already turning towards his lab equipment. "The chromatography alone, and I'll need to run bioassays. It's not cheap." "Name your price," I said. He named a figure that would have made me gasp under any other circumstances. I simply nodded. "Call me the moment you know anything." Dr. Finch's call came 36 hours later. His voice was electric with a mixture of triumph and horror. "Mrs. Grayson, you need to get to a hospital. Immediately." I was lying on my sofa, the world swimming in and out of focus. The cough was now a constant, racking presence. "What is it?" I croaked. "It's a synthetic analog of a cardiac glycoside, derived from oleander but heavily modified," he said, the words tumbling out. "It's designed to be undetectable in standard toxicology screens. It binds to heart tissue, creating a cumulative effect that mimics a massive, fatal arrhythmia. Brilliant, in a monstrous way." "The antidote?" I demanded, my hand clutching the phone like a lifeline. "There isn't one. Not a specific one, but a hospital can treat the symptoms. Potassium management, activated charcoal. If there's any still in your gut, digoxin-specific antibody fragments might bind to some of it. But it's a long shot. You don't have days, Eleanor. You have hours. Hours!" The word echoed in the vast, empty house. Going to a hospital was what David wanted. He would be there, the concerned son-in-law, guiding the doctors, perhaps even finding a way to administer a final, lethal dose in the chaos. It was a trap, but Finch had given me something else. The name of the poison, and knowing the weapon is the first step to defeating the wielder. A new, terrifying clarity cut through the sickness. I couldn't win this by hiding. I had to attack. I had to force David's hand and make him reveal himself in front of an undeniable witness. I had to get to Sarah, summoning a reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed. I dragged myself to my feet. I didn't call an ambulance. I called a private car and directed it to take me to the Briarwood estate. As the car sped through the city, I made 2 more calls. The first was to Arthur Brannigan. "It's happening tonight," I rasped. "I'm confronting him. I need you at the Briarwood estate. Bring everything. Be a witness." The second call was to my daughter. "Sarah," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm at Briarwood. I'm not well. It's important. You need to come alone, please." "Mom, what's wrong?" "I'll get David." "No!" The force of my own voice shocked me. "Alone, Sarah. This is between mother and daughter. Please, trust me." She agreed, her voice small and frightened. The stage was set. The car pulled up the long, winding driveway of the dark, sprawling Briarwood estate. I stumbled to the front door, using my key. The house was empty, cold, and smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. David's renovations. I made my way to the grand living room, my breath shallow, and collapsed into a dusty armchair, waiting. Sarah arrived first, her face a mask of panic. "Mom, oh my God, you look terrible." She rushed to my side, kneeling. "Why are you here? We need to get you to a hospital." "In a moment, darling," I whispered, clutching her hand. "First, you need to listen. Your husband, David, he's not who you think he is." Before I could continue, the front door opened again. David stood there, silhouetted against the night. He wasn't surprised to see me. He looked satisfied. He had followed her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I got your message. You shouldn't be here, worrying Sarah in your confused state." He walked in, his eyes locked on mine. The predator had cornered his prey. "I'm not confused, David," I said, my voice gaining strength from the sheer force of my hatred. "I know who you are. David Marsh. I know about Silas Vane. I know about the offshore account. And I know about the poison." A deadly stillness fell over him. Sarah looked between us, bewildered. "Poison? What is she talking about, David?" "She's delirious, sweetheart," David said, not taking his eyes off me. "The fever is talking." "It was in the champagne at the wedding," I continued, pulling the evidence bag with the napkin from my pocket. "A synthetic cardiac glycoside, slow-acting, undetectable. You were waiting for me to drop dead of a heart attack. You and your prison mentor were going to split my estate." Sarah stared at him, her faith beginning to crack. "David, tell her it's not true." He didn't. He just smiled, a cold, cruel smile that stripped away the last of his charming facade. "You really are tougher than you look, Eleanor. A shame. I had hoped it would be clean." "David," Sarah cried, rising to her feet. "What are you saying?" "He's saying he married you to get to my money, and he poisoned me to get it faster," I said, my strength fading fast. I could feel my heart fluttering erratically in my chest. "He's a con man and a murderer." David took a step forward, his hand slipping into his jacket pocket. "And now, it seems I'll have to make it messy. A tragic murder-suicide, a sick, unstable mother, and her daughter, who tragically got in the way." He pulled out a small, sleek pistol. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward. This was it. I had miscalculated. I had brought my daughter into the lion's den. But I hadn't come unarmed. As David raised the gun, the front door burst open. Arthur Brannigan stood there, not with police, but with a large, high-definition camera on his shoulder, its red recording light glowing brightly. "It's all on tape, Marsh!" Brannigan barked. "The whole confession." David spun around, momentarily shocked. It was the distraction I needed. With the last of my strength, I lunged forward, not at David, but at Sarah, shoving her behind the heavy armchair as the first shot rang out, deafening in the cavernous room. It was chaos. Brannigan dropped the camera and tackled David. They wrestled for the gun as I held a sobbing Sarah, shielding her with my body. A second shot went wild, shattering a window. Then the real cavalry arrived. Sirens wailed, and blue and red lights flooded the room through the windows. The police, alerted by Brannigan as a backup plan, swarmed in, subduing David and wrenching the gun from his hand. As they dragged him away in handcuffs, he was no longer a charming architect or a cold-blooded killer. He was just a man screaming obscenities, his perfect plan in ruins. Paramedics rushed to my side. As they loaded me onto a gurney, Sarah clung to my hand, her tears washing away the lies. She finally saw the truth. She was safe. The recovery was long. The poison had done significant damage to my heart, and I would live with the consequences for the rest of my life. But I was alive. David Marsh, a.k.a. David Miller, was charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, fraud, and a host of other crimes. The recording, combined with Brannigan's evidence and Dr. Finch's testimony, created an airtight case. He is now serving a life sentence, and his partner, Silas Vane, had years added to his own. The Briarwood estate was sold. Sarah used the money to start a new life, a foundation for victims of financial and romantic fraud. The experience scarred her, but it also forged her into a stronger, more resilient woman. We are closer than ever, the bond between us tempered in fire. I still live in my house. The shadows are just shadows now. I sit in my garden, the honest soil under my fingers, and I tend to my flowers. They are more beautiful than ever because I almost never got to see them bloom again. I was buried, but I clawed my way back to the light, and in the end, the truth was the only shovel I needed.